Remember we talked the other day about if you lived way back in the back country, you couldn't haul your corn as corn to market. What was the best way to get it there? You turn it into a drinkable liquid that made you walk funny if you drank it, and haul it in jugs, and that was easy. Plus, you could get paid cash for it by other people, and you would have money to buy what you didn't have. Now, you still have issues with Native Americans in the New West, which is west of the Appalachians and will soon be into what is now known as the Plains area. You have a lot of battles going on with the Indians and everything, and the people that live out there kind of like the way that they're handling the whole Indian situation, but then they step on somebody's toes when they come up with that 1791 whiskey tax. Do you remember that? How much was the tax? What percentage? You remember? 25%. So when they showed up at that one guy's house, they expected him to give them $250. Now, a farmer's not going to have $250. I mean, just by selling the moonshine and other products, he's probably going to have some money, but he's not going to have that kind of money. So, of course, you have all this stuff going on with the whiskey rebellion. So they have to distill the corn into a way they can sell it. The Western families will openly defy this tax. They will not pay it. They have the same demonstrations where they show up with pitchforks at people's houses. You know, if you got a pitchfork and you're going after somebody, they're probably going to run. That don't mean that they're forgetting about that money. So you have what is going to be affectionately known as the Whiskey Rebellion. But it's very interesting, this rebellion. So in the summer of '94, you have a large group of farmers, the farmers that have to turn their corn into this alcoholic beverage, threatening to march on Pittsburgh and loot the city because of this weird, unfair tax. So they're not happy. So they threaten to march on the city. But here's what happened. Hamilton goes to Washington and says, hey, you know, you've got these farmers threatening to march on Pittsburgh, so we need to send some troops out there and take care of these guys. So Washington gives him 13,000 men to take to Pennsylvania to put down this horrible revolution that's going to take place. When they get there, there's no revolution. There are no groups of farmers that are going to march on Pennsylvania or on Philadelphia. So Hamilton has egg on his face. So he has to go back and say, hey, there was no revolution. We went there for no reason. So it embarrassed him. And Thomas Jefferson thought this was the funniest thing in the whole world. I mean, it's like when Dan Quayle misspelled potatoes. I mean, this was the Dan Quayle thing that happened during this time. So there was never a rebellion. It was a threat of a rebellion. So Alexander Hamilton came out of that and looking just a little bit silly. Meanwhile, in 1789, you got a little mess going on over in France, known as the Revolution. It's going to be and will always be the most significant revolution to ever happen in Europe, even with Hitler. And this is bad. There are several causes to this. One of the questions on your test, I do believe, is what is not a cause of it, and you have some to choose from there. But these are the causes. You have a rising population. The press is getting to be pretty nosy. This is, I guess, the precursor to tabloid stuff. The government is not reforming anything. I actually have this book that I've read about 17 times. Love the book. It's about this this girl who is at court, and she's there during the Revolution, and she escapes to London and ends up on a farm, and it's a romance novel. So, but it's very accurate in its description of what the Revolution was like in the time before the Revolution. Marie Antoinette had a small little farm village, or a little village built, where her and the courtesans, or the women in the court, could put on little dresses and go out and pretend to be farmers. And they would have sheep out there that got baths every morning, had their wool brush, had ribbons and stuff on them, and they would pretend to be farmers. So there's a lot of decadence as far as what's going on. It was said that Marie Antoinette's toilette, which means her getting ready in the morning, took about 3 hours. And the women of the court would fight for position so they could go in and watch her get her wig powdered, and watch her pick out shoes that she wanted to wear, and which huge diamonds she wanted to wear and everything. So on one extreme you have opulence. You have people that are killing rats and animals in the street just to survive. They can't buy bread for their families. Bread's always going to be a staple in any diet. So obviously it's ripe for revolution. Marie Antoinette likes to spend money. All those dresses they're not gifts, she has to pay for them. Plus she has somebody that comes in and does her hair every morning. She has servants. Her daughter had 5 little pug dogs that all had diamond collars. Don't you think that's a bit opulent? A little excessive when you got people starving to death? So obviously the finances aren't in that great of a shape to begin with. Then you have a bunch of problems with the constitutional system. King Louis basically doesn't adhere to that. It's just a mess. It's the perfect atmosphere for a revolution. You have a very, very big rift between the very, very wealthy and the very, very poor. That's always going to be. You're always going to have the very wealthy and the very poor. Except now you've got a middle class scattered in there a little bit. So I would kind of try and think, which of these could I mess with to make it what I need? So we learned about the French Revolution later. Alright. You have an election in 96 with Jefferson and John Adams running. The way it broke down, they don't allow for political parties, so whoever gets the most votes will be president. Whoever gets the least, or the second most, will be vice president. Adams will win by 3 votes. So he barely beats Jefferson. The Federalists and the Republicans shared a lot of ideas, but there are a few things that they did not share. The Federalists will see themselves as a natural aristocracy. They don't like democracy. They think that if the masses rule, then it's going to be chaos in a bubble. So they don't want that. They think the upper class should rule over the social and economic classes that are inferior. Isn't that what's already happening anyway? Yeah, so we kind of got that. They have a pessimistic view of human nature. Anybody know what optimism and pessimism are?
Optimism is when you look on the broader side of things, isn't it? And pessimist, whatever I would say, is when you look on glass half empty, I guess.
Yeah. So they're very pessimistic of human nature. They feel that there are a few that are selected to lead the many. And I'm inclined to agree with that sometimes. If you really think about it and look at some of the stuff that's happened before. They don't like unbridled individualism. They think that everybody should be the same. They are afraid of the mob being the less educated lower classes. And they also think that the government has to restrain any kind of power given to the public. Would that be reasonable, you think? Anybody here ever been on a jury? No? You know, the Constitution says that you're guaranteed a jury of your peers. So if you're guaranteed a jury of your peers, then how come only the people that aren't smart enough to get out of jury duty are the ones that have to do it? So doesn't that say something right there? They're not smart enough to get out of jury duty. I don't think I want my life hanging in their hands. So maybe they got point. And economically, they're ahead of their time. Alexander Hamilton is a Federalist. The Republicans think that government threatens liberty. They're not like the Republicans today. They're being more like the Democrats. They think that any kind of treasury established would corrupt Congress. Get it? Yeah. They were afraid that the army would enslave people. Hadn't happened yet, but we're getting there. If you had the Constitution interpreted too broadly, it would give the government too much power. That was a real fear. They feel that the Federalists would corrupt the American moral system. They think agriculture is the centerpiece of everything. Liberty and virtue are attached to agriculture. Problem is, you can't make a whole lot of money at it, if any. You have to have some commercialism, yeah, because you can't always make everything on the farm. Like you can't make, I don't know, you can make cornmeal, you can make flour, but you can't make glass windows and stuff like that. You have to buy those. They think that you should limit commerce. They believe that by limiting commerce, you preserve their Republican values. They think people need to make things at home instead of industrializing. Who does that sound like later on? Where are we?
There.
Especially in the
South.
Right. So before the Civil War, the South doesn't industrialize because they share this view that agriculture is the center of everything. So you see how this is kind of linking to what's going to happen in the future. They don't understand that you need banks. They believe everybody should be an individual. And they think that instead of limiting the people's power in the government, you should limit the government's power so that people could become the best they can be without any interference from the government. What's wrong with that argument, though? Be the best you can be at anything that makes you successful. Everybody be going out and robbing people, or murdering people, or kidnapping people, or pillaging and plundering. You know, you have to have some kind of law. All right, you're going to have a couple of acts that you need to know. One of them is the Alien Act, which gives the president the right to deport any alien that's suspected of treasonable acts. Then you have the Sedition Act, which will essentially establish heavy fines, imprisonment for writing, speaking, or publishing anything, quote, of false, scandalous, or malicious nature against the government. Patriot Act, hello. Remember I said there are no new concepts in history. Been there before. The Naturalization Act will increase the time that people can vote from 5 to 14 years. Usually if you lived in the country for 5 years, you could vote. This is going to boost it up to 14. The people will not like the Sedition Act because it does violate the First Amendment. It will become a symbol of tyranny. You have another election in 1800 in which Thomas Jefferson will win. and Aaron Burr will become vice president. And, oh, look, a quote. Noah Webster says they have attempted to resist the force of public opinion instead of falling into the current with a view to direct it. Interesting quote. Basically what he's saying is by not appealing to the ordinary citizens, the Federalists basically put themselves out of the race. So Thomas Jefferson becomes president in 1800. And what's interesting is with politics of early days, it was very violent. It wasn't uncommon for senators and representatives to get in brawls on the Senate and the House floor.
Like Sumner.
Like Sumner, yeah. I mean, he pummeled this guy with his cane, and you've got to love that. I'm thinking if you take the cane and pummel some of these representatives now, maybe something would get done. You know? I mean, maybe they were doing it right. These two guys, Matthew Lyon and Roger Griswold, actually got into a fist fight on the floor of Congress. Why is there so much violence? These are the reasons. The Federalist legacy will, of course, be that the Constitution becomes a workable document. It provides a somewhat stable government, and it establishes a good economy and everything like that. But the Federalists will think that the entire political system is tottering on to its foundations because it's given too much power to the uncommon unwashed, or the common unwashed. Now, on the day Jefferson is inaugurated, it's going to be a little bit different than it was before because under the Federalists, they were into the pomp and circumstance thing. So everything was just a big to-do with them. He invites his friends, Margaret Smith and her husband, to the inauguration. And at the inauguration, she's just amazed at how peaceful you go from one leader to the next. It just amazes her. After his inauguration, which I think there was a little bit of music and a few speeches, but other than that, he was sworn in and went back to his boarding house. And he even declines to sit at the head of the table because he is now the president. He says, no, I will sit in my usual seat and let the man of the house sit at the head of the table. Which, would you see a president doing that now? No, they got to be at the head of the table. So he sits at his usual seat at the table. He stays in the boarding house for a couple of weeks until he moves into his official residence. Now, Thomas Jefferson was an interesting guy. He was about 6'3". Anybody hear about that height? Close to? Yeah, so he was a tall guy. He had red hair, like pretty red hair. He was very modest. He was very shy, unless he was around Sally, his mistress. He was born into a genteel family, so he was from Virginia society. He doesn't like to be the center of attention. And don't run for president, duh. But anyway, he did. He doesn't have very good manners. He would sit at the table and pick his teeth with a broom straw. So, the biggest thing is he's a product of the Enlightenment. Do you remember what the Enlightenment was about? Ben Franklin flying a kite in a storm. About scientific advancements, things like that. He has faith in the power of human reason to change the world. He thinks that we as humans have the capacity to change the world. Not necessarily always in a good way, but he believes that. And he says the will of the majority is the only sure guardian of the rights of man. What do you think he means by that? It's the majority of the people that guard their own rights. If people don't stand up for what they have a right to, then nothing will happen. But he fears people in power. He doesn't think you should have a strong government, but he sees government as a necessary evil. Sort of like when you go to vote for president, you vote for the lesser of two evils. Or three. When I run for president someday, I expect everybody to vote for me. Can you imagine me as president? It'd be interesting. I'd be running around the Middle East saying, you know, women are just as good as you are. I'd probably be stoned to death while I was over there, cause an international incident. Right away, Jefferson gets to business. He cuts spending. He reduces the size of the government by about a third. He got all these unnecessary jobs eliminated. He starts paying back the national debt, which is what Alexander Hamilton wanted to do when he started as Secretary of the Treasury. He will abolish any of the internal taxes that are unpopular that the Federalists passed, especially the whiskey tax. So what happens when he says that whiskey tax no longer applies? Who's going to love him to pieces?
Everyone.
Everybody, especially those guys that have to turn their corn into liquid to sell it. He gets rid of tax collectors and inspectors. Can you imagine if the local tax collector in your little village got fired? There'd be a big old party. Hey, he's gone. And he's going to depend on two things to run the government. Land taxes. If you have land, you pay tax on it. That's fair. And tariff duties, which other countries pay us to bring goods into our country. So people are going to get to keep more of their money. If you get to keep more of your money, are you going to really love this president? Yeah. Do you care if he has a mistress? No, you're lining up saying, I want to be one too. So yeah. Basically, the early presidents were rock stars. If you've ever seen a sitting position, he talks about that. Politicians were like rock stars back then. He's going to cut funding to the military. He cuts the Army budget in half. He reduces the size of the Army to 3,000 men. Now, this is not good. Why is this not good?
So you allow people to fight?
Not necessarily fight. Okay. For defensive purposes. You still have trouble with the Indians. Well, they see the trouble. So it's not necessarily a good thing to cut the Army so low, because that's what Bill Clinton did, remember? When he came into office, he cut the military so far down that when we did finally have to go to war in 91, he was president after. So he cut the military spending when he came into office. So Jefferson's going to do the same thing. And that's, his middle name's Jefferson. Isn't it?
Who, Bill Clinton?
Yeah, William Jefferson Clinton, isn't that his name? Isn't that weird? I just noticed that. Jefferson cut the military spending, so hey, wow. How kawiki-dinky. Okay.
And they both have mistresses.
And they both had I wonder if they had an affection for cigars. I don't know. He's going to reduce the money spent on the Navy. He's going to stop building the expensive frigates and build gunboats instead. Again, not a good move because the British still have an army or a navy that can kick anybody's butt at this point. In 8 years, he will take the national debt from $83 million to $57 million in 8 years' time. You know how long it would take to pay off our national debt right now?
Forever.
Infinity. They can't tell you when it can be paid off. He will also expand the operation of the federal bank or the national bank because he sees it as a necessary evil. I think there's a question on your test about this one. But before Adams leaves the presidency, he appoints William Marbury as the Justice of the Peace for Washington, D.C. That's all fine and good. You need a Justice of the Peace, but there's a big old stink that gets messed. It's like stepping on a skunk and making it mad. There's a big old stink about it. They send a commission out to say, you have been chosen for this. But before Adams can send it out, his term was over. So Thomas Jefferson doesn't deliver it to the guy. So technically he never was, because he didn't get that in his hand like you get a subpoena. If you don't touch it, you don't have to go. So he didn't get his commission. So what he's going to do is he's going to sue the government. And this is the Marbury versus Madison case. And he will sue under the Judiciary Act of 1789, which of course sets up the court system. And it will give the Supreme Court original jurisdiction over any case that comes in against federal offices. So if you're suing the government, in this case he was suing Jefferson for not giving him the commission, it has to go to the Supreme Court. So in 1803, it goes to court. John Marshall, who is now the Supreme Court Justice, or the head justice? I can't ever think of what it's called. Anyway, he's the head honcho. He says that the Judiciary Act violated the Constitution, that the Supreme Court does not have original jurisdiction, that the case was not valid because a writ of mandamus was not issued by Adams. So he's saying you never were the Justice of the Peace for D.C. And this will set up a very important precedent called judicial review. It's going to limit the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, and it's going to distribute the different cases that go to different courts. So it's going to establish who has original jurisdiction in a case. So in the end, Marbury will not win his case, and he ticks off Jefferson. Not a good thing. So meanwhile in Spain, while he's trying to get his Justice of the Peace so he can wear a hat and marry people, like on Andy Griffith, Spain's empire is coming like this on top of them. Somebody pushed the columns out and now the roof's falling in. So America is the politicians are thinking, well, if there's all this trouble in Spain, maybe we can get the remainder of the territory that they own in North America. So Spain will give Louisiana to France, not us. And they get the area from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, which is essentially the whole middle part. And it's in green right here. Here's the Louisiana Purchase. This is what we end up buying. So they give it to France. Meanwhile, a little short guy named Napoleon that likes to put his hand under his armpit for some reason takes over France and turns into one of the strongest military nations in the world. And they will lose this distinction after World War I. So he has an excellent military. He's wanting to expand. And under Spain, Americans had not been able to use the lower Mississippi River to move goods. So Jefferson gets this bright idea. He sends James Monroe to Paris and Robert Livingston, and they go over there and they talk to Bonaparte about buying the Louisiana area, which went all the way up to Canada. So Bonaparte sees that there's a good chance he's going to be going to war again, and he is going to need some money to fight this war. So Livingston and James Monroe pay $15 million for the territory, and they acquire 830,000 square miles. How many miles is that? 830,000 square. A lot, isn't it? It's that whole green stuff over there. So Jefferson will go down in history as making the greatest land purchase ever when he buys the Louisiana area. Now, a few years later, a guy named Seward's going to buy another place, and it's called Seward's Folly. What is it?
You bought an ice box. You bought Alaska.
He bought Alaska for 2 cents an acre, and now it's probably one of the richest states in the country. So after he's bought this, you have to have some people to go and see what's out there. So you can't have all that property and then not have somebody go tell you what it's all about. So he sends Lewis and Clark, and they are going to try to find a route to the Pacific. Along the way, they're going to try to establish diplomatic relations with the Native Americans, and they want to get a stronger claim on Oregon, because apparently we have Oregon, but we just can't really use it yet. So in the spring of 1804, Lewis and Clark and a famous Native American woman, Sacagawea, take off, and they head up the Missouri River. Sacagawea will serve as a guide, and her husband will help her. And they're going to stop in North Dakota to winter, and then they will go into to Oregon via the Rocky Mountains. You may ever see that movie? It's got Chris Farley in it, where they're trying to beat Lewis and Clark to the Pacific. Let's see, what is it? Almost Heroes or something like that. It's pretty good, and they're trying to get across there and beat Lewis and Clark. And technically they do. So on the way, they collect samples of the flora and fauna. They find several passes through the Rockies, and they produce very accurate maps. And they still have copies of these in some of the Smithsonian's. I've actually seen one. It's pretty good. Then, of course, you're going to have people settling that area, and your new settlers that will go west will be young, unmarried men. What they're going to want to do is go get land, set up, and then get them a wife and have them a family. They're going to be semi-subsistence farmers, which means they grow what they need and a little extra. You have more and more people moving, so eventually you get a market. That's, eventually everybody will start producing surplus agriculture to sell, because you are getting to use the Mississippi River now, so you can get your stuff to market. So that they're going to either make or grow everything they need right away, or sell things or exchange things to get others. Now, I know there's a question on your test about this. The new settlers that are coming to the Appalachian area are going to wreak havoc on the environment. They're going to start cutting down trees and not even care. By 1850, 100 million acres of trees had been cleared for farming, and the stumps just left to rot in the ground. You're going to have, obviously, other problems because of this. It's going to lead to a decline in the deer and the bear population. What is one of their main meat sources? Deer and bear. East of the Mississippi, the bison have already disappeared. West of the Mississippi, they're still out there, but they can't really get to them. What's a bison? Buffalo. Anybody know the Sioux word for buffalo?
What's a Sioux?
Sioux. A native tribe. It's Tatanka. That might be an interesting bonus question. So we're going to have a very destructive force on the environment. After you cut down all the trees, you're going to have soil erosion. You're going to have lower water tables, because you're going to be digging wells and stuff. You're going to have floods, because the stuff on the ground stops the water sometimes. But if you have this bare dirt and it's already wet, you're going to not have any way to soak that up. In summertime, it's hot, because what happened to all the trees? Cut them down. The winters are going to be really, really cold, because you cut down the trees, and it keeps a lot of the cold off of it. Once you cut down the trees, the wind's going to be able to get to the topsoil, just like the Dust Bowl. Anybody familiar with the Dust Bowl? where the entire topsoil of the Great Plains was blown into the Atlantic Ocean. Literally. The Ohio Valley is going to turn into something you might see after a war or a battle. It's got like pools of water filled with mosquitoes and everything else. And mosquitoes are not good. They carry all kinds of illnesses. So you've got people moving west. So you're going to have a series of revivals that will take place. And this will be known as the Second Great Awakening or a rebirth of religion. You have a bunch of ministers pop up all over the place. It's like you go on the internet and you become an ordained minister and marry people now.
I have a friend at work that did that.
Really?
Yeah, she draws in like a little book and everything, and how to marry people. I think it's pretty funny.
Yeah. I was going to do that when my sister got married, but
She wants one of us let her marry us, and we're like, oh no.
Yeah. Well, my family would pitch a fit if that happened. So you're going to start having these revivals everywhere. Now, what's going to happen, especially in Kentucky, Kentucky's going to be a hotbed for these things. You have people that will come from up to 100 miles away or more to go to these things. And they'll last for days at a time. And they would camp out, and you'd have different ministers that would come in, sort of like a religious Woodstock. So you had people coming in and just camping out. And they're known as camp meetings because people camped while they did it. And the most famous one, or the biggest one of all, is Cane Ridge. I repeat. The biggest one, the most important one, was Cane Ridge. You had about 10,000 people show up for this thing. Because you're putting so much pressure on the Native Americans, their culture's going to suffer as well. Between 1800 and 1810, the Indians will lose 100 million acres in the Ohio Valley. They're paid for it. This is going to lead to a loss of their culture, and I do believe this might be one of yours on your test. Look. So I would pay attention. They're going to lose hunting grounds. When they do that, they're going to have scarcity as far as food and game. If you can't have food, you're going to have to buy it from somebody, so this makes you dependent on white traders. To pay for these goods, the Indians will overhunt even more in their areas to trade furs for these things. And whole groups of animals will disappear. The tribes will then invade the hunting grounds of other tribes and cause, wars and stuff like that. They are given alcoholic beverages or fire water, as they called it, and this will lead to, the decline of the family life of the Native Americans because they become alcoholics. When you get a little schnockered, you tend to want to fight, so you'll have more violence. The family disintegrates because all of a sudden you're beating up on your wife and kids. So those are just some of them. Then you have a prophet named Tecumseh, and he will want a return to the old ways. That's not a new concept. And he starts his own town in Indiana called Prophet's Town. And there's a quote by him on your quiz. In 1804, Jefferson gets reelected, and he will defeat Charles Cotesworth Pinckney. I'd like to have a name like that. Cotesworth. So, there's a war going on in Europe. And of course we're feeling the brunt of that. So England and France are at war, and Jefferson doesn't want any part of that. We benefit on both sides because we can trade with both sides. But when the British Navy starts capturing American sailors and forcing them to be sailors and to fight in the army and stuff, things start going a little wrong. And they estimate about 10,000 people were taken from American ships and forced to fight for the British. Then the French began to do this. So they finally come up with this deal, and Bonaparte will say that by ordering the seizure of any neutral ship. So anyway, they make a deal with Britain, and they promise not to mess with their ships. So Bonaparte will have the ships seized because he thinks they're breaking the rules or something. I'm not sure how that goes. So after all this, Jefferson decides that he is going to come up with a way to not have to fight a war, but to get his point across. So he calls his plan peaceful coercion, and it prohibits American ships from trading with foreign ports. It stops all export of American goods. Why is this bad? How do we make our money? We export goods. So in December 1807, Congress passes the Embargo Act, and Jefferson, this is his biggest blunder ever. In 1807, we had exports of $108 million. A year later, it had dropped to $22 million. In 1807, we paid about $145 million in exports. A year later, it's 58. So they revoked, they repealed that. So in 1808, you have another election, and James Madison will win. He's a very good politician. He was a father of the Constitution. He was a floor leader in Congress. He founded the Republican Party. He was Secretary of State under Jefferson. He had been in political service for 25 years, but he does not have leadership abilities, and he does not know how to impose his will on people. You have a new generation of Republicans show up. They're more nationalistic. They want a united country. They want better economic development. They want to expand, and they're going to become known as the war hawks. Don't ask me why, I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out, and I can't. So in 1809, they repealed the embargo, and finally Bonaparte says, yeah, we won't capture your ships if you won't trade with Britain. So we said, okay, and we trust him. And anyway, he continues to take our ships. So on June 16, 1812, Congress declares war against the British. This will be the War of 1812, the final battle, of course, being the Battle of New Orleans. What's so unique about that battle? We're going to find out. So you're going to have a war. We're not ready for war because remember I said you shouldn't cut back the army? Well, we're paying for that now. The Navy can't break the British blockade. The Army was very small and had very poor leaders. The men weren't trained well. In 1812, you have a failed three-pronged attack from Canada that almost made us British subjects again. In 1813, Commander Hazard Perry will finally take Lake Erie and let us have control of Lake Erie, which will hit the British pretty hard. Now, Tecumseh, remember him? He wanted people to go back to the old ways. He says this when he sees that the British are attacking the U.S. He says, a chance such as will never occur again. That's an interesting quote, don't you think? Could it be on your quote list? Possibly. He sides with the British, and then you will have a couple of battles. Battle of Horseshoe Bend in 1814. Andrew Jackson will come to military prowess here, and he defeats the Creeks, and then he gets 22 million acres of land in the Mississippi area. In 1813, William Henry Harrison will defeat the British at the Battle of the Thames, and Tecumseh is killed in battle. He really looks a lot like my brother-in-law. It's kind of scary. I mean, he has the same mouth and nose and everything. So the British they're trying to divide America into three parts. And it kind of works, it kind of doesn't. a small British force will get control of Washington, D.C., and I think that's when they burned down the White House, or the original White House. And then they'll attack Fort McHenry, and they're unable to take Fort McHenry. And this is where Francis Scott Key will write the Star Spangled Banner. How many verses are there in the Star Spangled Banner?
23.
There are 4.
4.
How many do we sing? 1. There are more verses to that song. So his song will be adopted as a national anthem, but only the first stanza, or whatever. The British will target New Orleans, and here's where Andrew Jackson will fight the British. Have you ever heard the song in 1814, Took a Little Trip? Yeah, this is where this will happen. So what Andrew Jackson is going to do is he gets ready to attack the British. Now, he says, charge, the war's over. So he defeats the British after the war's over. If you've seen Assume the Position, he talks about that also. He says the best way to beat your enemy is wait till after the war's over and then attack them. So basically that's what he does. And so according to different scholars, this is the battle that will eventually show Britain that they're not top dog anymore. So after this war, they start trying to build up the United States now that they have won independence 2 times. Won independence 2 times. You have a surge of nationalism. Everybody's proud to be American. Woohoo! We beat the British again. Not really, but you know. So you have another election in 1816. Obviously, we've never had a president, Rufus King, so we know James Monroe will win. And he will issue in an era, what is called an era of good feelings. Now, this is going to start leading us up to what's going to happen with the Civil War. In 1819, the Missouri Territory wants to become a state, but they want to come in as a slave state. Problem is, at that time, there are 11 free states and 11 slave states. So they want to try to keep the balance. Now, Maine also applies for statehood as a free state. They want to try to keep slave states from coming in, but they know that this isn't going to happen. So Missouri will be admitted, and Maine is admitted as well. And this is when you get the 3630 line, where they will prohibit slavery.
What's the picture that was saved in like the White House?
George Washington's.
Was that it?
Yeah.
Wasn't it Madison's Walk or something?
Yeah, she saved the portrait of George Washington. And they think that the bottom of it might have got burned and they had to take it off because it looks like it's not finished. They think it may have gotten damaged.
Do they still have it?
Mm-hmm. It's still there, yeah. I never got to go to the White House either time I was in D.C. and I really wanted to. I didn't get to, but it's on the tour.
I can't remember. I thought it was like in Madison or something. I can't remember.
No, it was George Washington. She saved that. She went back in to save that painting.
Yeah.
Because he was such a great man. Whatever. Anywho. So, remember who I told you was the first great compromiser? Ben Franklin. So now we have Henry Clay coming onto the scene. But Henry Clay is known as the Great Compromiser. And he keeps us out of a civil war for about 40 years, which is pretty good. So Henry Clay offers the Missouri Compromise, and that's what you get. You get Missouri coming in as a slave state, Maine is a free state, and you have the 3630 line established. And Monroe signs this, and it, ends the problem. Let's see. James Monroe wants to go all the way to the Pacific Ocean, but we have to fight Spain for that, so we will annex unofficially West Florida. And in 1819, Spain will agree to the Adams-Owens Treaty, the Continental Treaty, and give us the territory all the way to the Pacific Ocean in the northwest and Florida. So now we have all of Spain's holdings. Then you have the Monroe Doctrine, and this will establish the northern border of the U.S. at the 49th parallel, which it still is today. In 1823, a guy named George Canning will make sure that the U.S. promises not to expand into Latin America. Monroe wants to go along with this, but I don't think it happens. He promises that in his address to Congress that we will not interfere in European affairs. We won't interfere in already established European colonies. And a year later, this becomes known as the Monroe Doctrine. You have better relations with the British, and it ends the external threat to us, and there was someone who can with them. We can concentrate on going west. Jefferson wants to preserve the small farmers because they are the backbone. You have young Republicans, the new kids on the block, saying we need these tariffs to protect our industry. They want to build roads and canals so that transportation's easier. And in one of my favorite books, she actually, it's weird, so she traveled back in time after a car wreck, and they're building a canal up in Delaware. And it's very accurate because I did the research. So they do build canals. And so you have this thing now, you have commercialistic goals of the new Republicans, and then you have to wonder what's going to happen to the farmers. So on July 4, 1826, Jefferson and John Adams will die within hours of each other. And this was on the 50th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. It's pretty weird, huh? Ooh, we got through 9. Now,